Thank you. Thank you, Liam. And thank you so much, Iain, for joining us for this conversation or dialogue today. It's a great honor for us to have you with us. And I wonder particularly how it might feel, as it were, from the inside to be more in the world of the left hemisphere or more in the world of the right hemisphere.
But there is the fact that the brain is divided, which is an extraordinary fact. I mean, over evolution, it didn't have to be divided. It could be one mass, and it exists to make connections. So on the face of it, there's a puzzle there. Creatures have developed the capacity to pay two kinds of attention to the world at once. One, very narrow, very precisely focused, committed to something you already know what it is, and that's why you're interested in it. And the other, exactly the opposite, uncommitted as to what it will find, on the lookout, vigilant, broad, and sustained. Now, attention is very, very important. Attention is how the world comes into being for us. And we participate in what comes into being by the kind of attention we dispose towards the world. In fact, attention is nothing more nor less than the disposition of your consciousness towards the world. You can dispose it in one way, to get things, to grab them very narrowly, or in another receptive, open, uncommitted way to connect. And attention is something that can either alienate by staring at something, by threatening something, alien from you, or can be the base of love. In fact, a certain kind of attention is what love is. Is the one kind of attention fragmentary, so it sees a part and another part and another. So it sees bits, it sees pieces, it sees parts. It doesn't see the whole. And its idea of what a whole is something that you make up afterwards by the bits that you got, much as you might build a machine. You have some parts, you put them together, there we have it. A quite different way of attending sees the whole and only secondarily notices that there are some areas of the whole that it can lock its attention onto and call parts. But in order to understand the nature of the parts, it would have to know what the whole was to which it belonged, because context changes what it is. Just as much as to know what a whole is to know the things that go to constitute it. So one of the hemispheres is able to see parts and wholes, but the other is only able to see parts. But the right hemisphere sees that things very rarely fit very well in the boxes. And in fact, to get anything into a box, you have to cut it off from the web that surrounds it so that it can be fitted into a box. It's always connected, ultimately with everything else, but certainly immediately with things around it that alter its nature. The context of something changes utterly the nature of what it is. So the right hemisphere sees things in context and interconnected, but the left as separate and out of context, decontextualized. Now, one of those important contexts is the body. Everything that we have about us is, I'd like to say, amphibian. We are spiritual beings. We are physical beings. And these are not contraries. They have to be held together. So the right hemisphere is connected to the body in a number of ways. It has what's called the body image, which is by no means a visual image. It is the sense, the sort of below awareness sense of one's body all around, much as one might feel it in a kind of meditation that you and I have practiced. So you've got one part of the brain that is abstracted out of context, that sees things as fragmentary, sees them as familiar, and the right hemisphere is seeing them as unique cases that are not necessarily fittable into categories, that ramify into other things, that change and that flow. Because the left hemisphere wants to fix them in. Now, much of what is valuable, I would say almost everything that is valuable that we understand and know, has to remain implicit. I first realized this when I was trying to help people understand poetry, that if you paraphrase it, you've completely lost it. You haven't got something like the poem. You haven't got anything at all. You're left with a handful of doubts. It's a vanishing trick. It's amazing. You cannot make it explicit any more than you can tell a joke. And someone says, well, I don't understand it. Then you explain it. Oh, yeah, funny. No, jokes are not funny when they have to explain. But neither are any of the really important things in our lives able to be made explicit. All the really profound things, experience of love, spiritual experience, none of these are well served by language or by analysis. And if we stick only to what can be asserted in language and what can be analysed, we fail to see whole realms of existence, and not just incidental ones, but the ones that are really of the core value to us. So, but now in our world, we spend a lot of our time fixing things. I mean, fixing in the sense of stopping the flow, disconnecting them. We have a fragmentary vision. We try to categorize everything. We lose the sense of the unique. We're over-optimistic about what we're doing. We ignore all the valuable knowledge and experience which is not explicit and can't be rendered in language. And we live in a world of representations on screens, in whatever way, but just not being in contact anymore with the vividness of life.
And are there ways that we can be more in touch with that world of what can also be called direct perception?
Yes, there are. I like the beginner's mind very much for two reasons. One is that possibly one of the reasons why time goes much more slowly when you're a child is that you are constantly present because everything is new. You don't have that enormous number of already digested experiences with which to sort of rob it of its immediacy.
Some other traditions, yoga, for example, you consciously sculpt your breath versus following your breath, right? And practitioners of these different traditions don't necessarily see them as different things, but from the kind of attention we're talking of allowing things to occur to you versus attending to, those are very different things, is seems to be what you're saying.
Yes, that's right. And of course, there's purely a linguistic question here, which draws attention to the fact that in the West, what we mean by pay attention is pay a particular kind of attention, a rather highly focused, possibly alienating kind of attention. But of course, both the broader awareness of the right hemisphere and that attentional beam of the left hemisphere are just different ways of attending. So when one inhabits, one's not actually trying to change anything. One's allowing oneself to be there and allowing what is there to be present to you.
Do you think it's possible that just by choosing to pay attention to the body in this more right hemispheric way, we might actually be restoring the balance?
I do think that, yes. The point is that each hemisphere contributes, but it contributes in a way which is a formula which I have found in virtually every tradition that I've looked at, which is that there is a master and there is a servant, in my terms, the emissary. And these two are valuable. The master needs the servant needs the master. But they must retain that relationship, that the master is the one that is overall in control. If the servant starts to become the master, all is lost. And of course, unfortunately, we live in an age which is besotted with the idea that everything is equal to everything else, whereas in my view, that's not to see the world, because nothing is equal to anything else, which doesn't mean that one shouldn't always be humble and tolerant and kind, but it's nothing to do with equality. We've gone from a situation in which we had a good balance of these two very necessary things, in which the servant served the master well, to one in which the servant has become the master. It happened 3 times over. Every time the civilization collapsed, it became over-concerned with power, with greed, with militarism, with hierarchy, with sameness, with bureaucracy, and it lost its insight and its quality, and it deteriorated. So coming back to your point, we can help it in the right direction. But it's rather like this. Suppose you get a radio set, and to begin with, you're very excited, and you listen to several different channels. And after a while, you quickly settle down that this is the channel you're going to tune into. And you never bother to tune into any other channel. The radio set hasn't changed. It's what you do with it. The point I'm wanting to make is that we use the brain now in a certain way. And it may have something to do with what happens when a civilization becomes very large and urban. And so we get a public debate which is crude in the extreme, violent in its terms, angry and aggressive. And by the way, for those people who still think that the left hemisphere must be, well, maybe rather boring, but at least reliable and has no emotions. No, the most lateralized emotion in the brain happens to be anger. And guess what? It lateralizes to the left hemisphere. Well, that is where we've gone. So we need to row back. And I suppose your question was, what can we do? And I sometimes rather unfairly say it's the typical left hemisphere question. I want to fix. I want to put a plaster on this and it's all going to be all right. I want 8 bullet points that I can do before breakfast and phew, it's all going to be okay. So it's not like that. It's a path, you know, a Tao, a journey. It's something also that, like the Tao, one doesn't determine, but one has a choice about whether one follows it. So the choice element is not about this is how we do it. The choice is I'm going to stop doing many of the things that I do that I now see are unproductive. And I'm going to open myself to hear, to see, to understand for the first time things that are there for the knowing, if I can only be receptive to them as well. So all these things help you to grow, to listen more, to be present more, not to be so sure you're right and to follow your path and to go get, but seeing that you are connected to society, you were never separate from it, you grew out of it and you go back into it, that you are connected from nature. It is not an environment, it is not something that is environ, around you, it is something that is in you and you are in it and you came out of it and go back to it.
And when it comes to saying that all is one, I think, you know, this is what happens. It's sometimes what we refer to in Buddhism as the Zen sickness. When we first come in touch with the ideas of, you know, everything's interconnected and isn't it all wonderful, then we might actually just jump to that extreme, which for me is kind of like turning the cosmos into a smoothie. You know, you just put it in the blender and then it's just, you know, but it's not a smoothie. It's interesting. It does have bits that are different and that are beautiful, and each is beautiful in its own way in relation to the whole.
Between, you know, people say to me, all is one, and I say, yes, and all is many, now what? And I think holding both of them together is very good. My favorite Buddhist saying is, yes, but. And I don't think there should be any one line that is right.
The way in which we speak of knowledge in Buddhism as an obstacle to insight, and that actually, of course, there's part of us that wants to accumulate more and more intellectual knowledge, and we think that that will somehow, you know, shore us up. But we learn that to be in contact with life and with the present moment, and with, you know, the constant sort of arising of new truths, we have to be able to release that which we hold to be true.
Dwelling in the place of emptiness is fulfillment and richness. Because, of course, it's not emptiness as we normally mean it. It's an emptiness which is full of potential. And the more we actualize it into the things we think we know, the more we fill it up with rubbish. There's no room there again. So empty again, and allow the potential to emerge.
No, precisely.